Candace. I mean, it's interesting how disconnected we sort of are in terms of the state sort of branches, and then we got the subsets within the counties and so forth.
Oh, that's interesting, because I've actually been a national co-chair a couple of times, and I've been the national co-chair of the Black Caucus for a while. So,
okay, here we are, and I'm going to put the link there. That's where we're live now on YouTube. You see it?
I will get it.
All right, welcome everyone. Let me put my face back up here. Okay, good evening everyone. You are tuned in to Collective Sessions, Healing America, the Reparations Chapter, Illinois. Tonight we are blessed with a very special guest present. His name is Daryl Malk. He is part of the National Black Caucus and a member of the Green Party, the National Green Party. Tonight, he will be discussing reparations and the different distinctions therefore. We are so excited to have you on the show tonight, Daryl. I hope you enjoyed your holidays, and I appreciate you spending your Palm Sunday evening with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking. Hopefully I can share some thoughts. I'm sure you all have been doing way more of this work consistently longer than I have. So hopefully I can shed a little light into some things we're doing and to the ideas around, and just have a general conversation about it.
Awesome. Well, I want to introduce you.
There are definitely more people far more informed.
Yeah, tell us about your time during the rally this year, during the inauguration on the ground. I know you were on the ground. You got a chance to meet with the peace team. We sent out at least 30 people out there. What was that experience for you?
So, it was a very interesting experience. And the way that we like to think about it was as a sort of a test run and a feeler for some folks that came from other parts of the country. Some of our team on the Black Caucus and the National Black Caucus from Minnesota were here. And so we got a chance to see what is it really like to be in DC, doing a rally, doing a march, and those kinds of things. Because of the inauguration and because of the insurrection on the 6th of January, things dramatically changed overnight in terms of our planning for that and what we were able to do. It also, though, gave us an opportunity to develop some new working relationships with other groups like ADOS, DMV was a part of it, and they helped us with some of the planning and organizing, and they were there logistically with us. So that gave us a chance to get our relationship with that body that some of us didn't have, some did and some didn't. Also the socialist, I'm gonna mess up their name now that you're saying it. The part of the Black Socialist Party, but it's not the Socialist Party, but they're Black. But I'm sorry guys, I'm messing up the name.
It's fine, don't worry.
But they were there, and I had recently had an opportunity to go and speak at one of their rallies in Philadelphia, or latter part of last year, and so that was a wonderful experience. And so they came and supported the work that we were doing here, along with your peace group, which was phenomenal and amazing that your peace group was there. So again, we got to forge some new relationships, and in preparation for thinking about what does it look like to do something else. And so we're in the process of talking about something that may happen around Juneteenth this time. So I know there was another rally that was held in February following the January one. And so we're looking at something that may happen around Juneteenth. Those are still, we're still working out those ideas and the thoughts and what we're going to do with that. And if that's going to be feasible, we're still, filling out COVID, filling out the rest of the racist elements of the country and how they choose to act out. So we can make sure that we're staying safe and responsible.
Like for the Green Party, for us to be a part of your rally or the event that you're coordinating on June 19th. We were discussing it a few days ago. We don't know if we want to have a picnic or a rally. I don't know, but we can talk about that later.
That would be great. One of the things the National Black Caucus is talking about is having a National Black Caucus meeting, and having folks come in for the weekend and have some workshops, plenaries, discussion, and then these actions. And part of the idea includes a lobby day with Congress, the House of Reps and the senators. So there's a lot of ideas there. So we'd love to do some things and have you be a part of that effort with us. Really bringing the community together and from across the nation, but particularly in the DMV area. DC is overrun, we'll say, with rallies and marches and protests. They're sort of common. And so folks that live here aren't always as engaged in them because it's just like another group is doing another thing. And so we're trying to find ways to also sort of wake up the DC for that. And I think this push for statehood right now that's going on in Congress is a great way for us to continue waking up our community to the basic elements of democracy that are denied both Black folks in DC, but around the country.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. The disparities and stuff in our nation with the African community, particularly reparations.
Right. So one of the things, reparations, I'll admit for myself, was as a I don't know if it's the curse of education or if it's a good thing to have some education. I don't know in this case, right? Because for a long time, while I believed reparations were necessary, I couldn't wrap my brain around how they'd ever happen. And so I wasn't really pushing or really, in that world very much. And although it was happening around me, I'd been to some Coburn meetings and some other Green Party things in different places, local groups, organizations that have done things over the years. I've been in the conversation or around the conversations, but not sure that I was understanding or believing that it was how we make it a reality. That was really my challenge. It's like, do you put a lot of effort and energy into something that you just know is probably never going to happen? Or do you do other things that are going to be better for us? And I think you do both. I think I've learned now that you do both. You work for what you want and you get what you can get along the way, but you don't stop pushing for what you want. And I think reparations is one of those things. It's been going on for a long time with discussions in Congress and other places. And now it's really come to a head with the Black Lives Matter movement and just continuing to see just how the magnitude of the disparities that are going on in Black and Brown communities, particularly with the police brutality, with the incarceration rates, with challenges in education, healthcare, and the sick care industry that we have going on. So there's so many ways that this is problematic. So I've been able to come to a new understanding about the value and the importance of reparations, not just about a monetary repairing of the theft of wages and the loss of community and family, but also how all of those systems built themselves in order to make a permanent underclass of groups of people, and that needs repairing as well. And so there's a wider discussion about what reparations look like, not excluding the monetary repayment, because that's a necessary element. You got to pay for the pain you've caused. You've got to pay for the wealth that you've gained on the backs of other people who did not get those wages. Slaves did not leave the plantation when they were freed, quote unquote, and have a bank account where they could go and start something over. They left with what they had, which was nothing.
Right.
And so that can never stand as having been okay. People deserve their freedom, but getting freedom is not your payment. Getting freedom is your right. Getting is what's owed to you.
Yeah, I might just interject here. I'm Alia, by the way. I'm in the Illinois branch of the Green Party. I ran on a state rep platform here. And I do agree with you. I feel that it is a right. A lot of the times, even within our own reparations chapter, our discussions that have been held, there is that viewpoint that we should just have that put away in the past and just work on healing within each own person. And that was sort of a viewpoint brought on by Ms. Ellen Jacoby. Even though the Jewish people were granted their reparations, she still had her own viewpoint that she does suffer as a Jewish person, but she wasn't given reparations. So that was an interesting dialogue that we had there with her. But I think from a legal standpoint, I think every person that has endured some level of right or work or are owed wages, at least, or for
Absolutely.
their contributions. It's almost a form of equity in law that I would believe would exist. So having said that, I mean, there are different interpretations. She did go on to say that grants would be a great way to have reparations or counseling or therapy or dealing with the healing and just working from there. But I think reparations also should address the inequity or just the feeling of being granted a certain right, and that could lead to healing within itself. But
I think it's interesting when folks who are able to live comfortably in a white privilege can say, well, you know, maybe we could do therapy. Yeah, no, therapy, if we can already get therapy, so that's not reparations. You know, if you want to hire some new therapists and get folks in who are going to have this specialty and deal with generational trauma, that's something different. But that's also not reparations. That's what's needed. So the issue here is the country has to heal, and until the country deals with its racist past and the power that it has, the United States, as wealthy as it is wealthy because of the backs of African slaves who were brought here and treated as 3/5 human. We can't forget these pieces, that the justification for what was done was these aren't really humans. So we can do what we want to them because they're animals, and we're treated like animals, and we're paid like animals. Nothing. They were fed, and there was a barn, if you will, that they could live in under a roof that, you know, to fight some of the element, but not all of it. We have to get past the idea in the US that slavery is some glorified work environment, that it was a wonderful, decent place. Whilst, yes, people were owned and some people were the masters, it's kind of like the business owners and the workers. You can't equate that. It's not the same thing. It's not the same when a person could not leave and say, I no longer want to do this without being threatened with being killed. And having your children taken from you, having your families ripped apart, having your language be out of you, having your culture and your heritage stripped from you. So this isn't just a thing of, oh, well, you know, it was we weren't playing well together, so now let's play better. We'll make a new playground and play better together. There is healing that has to take place, and there is significant loss in wealth that this country has. The Carnegies and the Kennedys and others who pass on their wealth to their children generation after generations, the Deloittes and all those other folks that have passed money down, the Carnegie Mellons and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and all these people who have benefited, and they're for generations, for hundreds of years, the hundreds of years that we have been without, they have been with. And so there, at some point, there has to be a reckoning for that. And there has to be a reparation, which is a repairing of the damage that has been done to a group of people, in this case, sanctioned by government. Be very, very different if we weren't talking about something that had been sanctioned by government. And you could say, well, that company did something bad and that company owes money to those families that they did that to. But this is a government system that built itself on that. Slave owners wrote the Constitution and wrote the Declaration of Independence and did not write Black people in their consciousness. We have to deal with that.
Okay.
Anna?
So by saying that you feel as though it's not playing a victim mentality, is that what your overall message is? That this is not victimhood, it's something different?
Yes and no. It is yes, and, right? We blacks were victims. They were victimized and they were brutalized. It was not just about some little harm. This is brutal, hundreds of years of brutal treatment. And then hundreds of years afterwards of the remnants of that continuing to impact the quality of life for people. And we see that time and time again. Every time there's a new challenge, there should be no reason why the COVID virus would be impacting Blacks more than anyone else in this country. But there's a systemic connection to inherent disparities in how health and wellness have gone on that have contributed to this. And so those things matter. I was reading an article, I think that you all sent me, and I was looking at something that talked about hypertension and diabetes in the Caribbean and how they linked that back to the diets that they were given. Well, this is true here. There were diets that we were able to live off of. When you're living off of the juice of the greens and every part of the animal that is not being eaten by the masters, feet, hooves, tails, the unhealthiest parts, if you will, of those animals, the intestines, come on now. Although we're calling it a delicacy now for some people who are just now learning about chitterlings, but the intestines of an animal, that's where the bile is. We're cleaning it out, cooking it up, and eating the organ that manages the bile. How, in any stretch of the imagination, can you say that that was a healthy diet? So there are systemic things that, yes, Black folks, particularly and Africans in the Americas, were brutalized. And so, yeah, they were victimized. So yes, there is that, but there is also then beyond that, what's happened after that. And so it isn't just sort of about a victim mentality, it's a victim reality. There are victims and there were perpetrators of that. And so there is a reckoning that has to happen. And so, yeah, and so I don't live my life from a victim mentality. I don't walk around saying, oh, I can't achieve something because of what happened to my great-great-great-grandparents. And I can trace my family back, at least on two sides, to different sets of direct descendants of slavery, and some parts of my family that were not. But there are others that definitely were, and it's not that far back that we have to go to find them. At least in one of my family stories, Flora and Joe, who were Joe was brought over on a slave ship, and Flora was brought over also, but she was an indentured servant, and she was coming from Ireland. And if you know anything about the history of racism and culture wars, Ireland's were the N-word of Europeans at that time. And so when her ship was shipwrecked, she was floating, the slave ship brought her onto the ship, brought her to the US, and then she was made an indentured servant. She was able to gain her freedom after a period of time, but she was able to marry. But because she was Irish, she obviously couldn't marry into proper white society. And she hadn't lived among them. She had lived among the slaves. And so she was allowed to marry Joe, and they were allowed to leave, and they started at least one branch of my family, of my grandmother, my mother, my maternal side of my family. And so we know the story. It's been passed on to us over the decades and generations. And so it isn't that we are exclusively in pain in the moment, but it is a pain that resonates. Had Flora and Joe been given any degree of what they were worth and their value of their labor that they had, they would have been able to build on that and pass that down, as long as the rest of the laws made it possible for them to do that. So you see how it all connects. Like, even if you had given slaves a whole bunch of their money, they weren't allowed to buy land. They weren't allowed to have anything. They weren't allowed to do anything. And even as late as now, there are neighborhoods and areas where we're still redlined out of, where you can't buy into those neighborhoods, even if you want to. So this problem is systemic, and it goes much deeper than just what happened during slavery, but that's where it starts. And you have to go back to the beginning. You have to repair the problem from where it started, and then fix the other things as well.
Okay, Anna, would you like to say something?
I wanted to talk about the Illinois, what we can do to help repair. One of the items, policy issues that the Illinois Green Party wants is a public bank, especially now that we have cannabis money here that our banks cannot, the regular banks cannot hold due to federal regulations. So with the public bank, we can give out low to no interest and encourage employee-owned businesses, which is also, as you know, a Green Party value of community-based economics, and also maybe possibly a land transfer from cities to individuals or businesses to help fix the abandoned storefront problems that cities have. And I know probably all cities have probably at least a few now. So what do you think about if we were able to go ahead and push the public bank? That's my first question. And then my second question is, what do you think about Asheville, North Carolina? And I know recently Evanston, they also in Illinois, they also had passed reparation laws as well.
Right.
So if you know any other ones, and what are you doing? What's the Black Caucus doing?
So I'll try to take those in order if I don't forget them, right? So the public bank. So I'm in DC, and we also have a part of our DC State Green Party platform and pushes for a public bank. And so we have been advocating for that in DC for a long time. So we would obviously agree that nationally having these public banks would be the best place. The bigger key is that the public banks should be organized in such a way that they are run and managed by Black people. That those are the people, because banks, people make a good salary, in banking, and banks make profit as well, and so that profit then can be redistributed back into Black communities as well. So I think that doesn't mean that every public bank has to be run by a Black person, but a great majority of them should be. To especially money that's going to come from reparations, and it needs to be handled and managed to be passed out, should go to those Black-owned banks, and then whatever the process is for distributing it into the hands of the people will come from there. Now, how we do that and what we do, I think also, as you were talking, I thought those are good ideas, but I think the ideas have to be generated from the communities and from the people themselves. And so I think that reparations may look different for folks in California, people in Mississippi. Their needs may be different. And those folks who are living there, who are due reparations, should be able to speak to how that is going to best serve them and their families going forward. But I do think there are some standard things that the US should do, period. Whatever that dollar amount, that $5 or $6 trillion, $13 trillion amount that needs to be redistributed to Black folks, that is one thing that should be definitely done. But whether or not we offer a certain level of education or training for some people that are, everyone isn't going to college, right? No matter how much we want them to. Everyone isn't designed that way. So there are people that are going to go to trade schools and do things, culinary arts, auto mechanics, computer technology. There are things that people will do that don't necessarily require college degrees. So being able to get into those training programs and have those things paid for. When I say education, I'm thinking broader than just formal college-based education, but making that possible for them. Also making sure that our schools are properly resourced prior to college, our high schools, our junior middle schools, junior high schools, elementary schools, pre-K, all of that should be properly resourced so that people are getting the best education from the start, that our healthcare should be nationalized. So, and universal healthcare, so that we can get rid of disparities, because everyone has access to the same healthcare. If it's good enough for Congress, it's good enough for the people of the United States. And that's where we need to be going down that road. So there are a lot of things that need to be put in place in order to make this comprehensive program. Because remember, we start talking about cities. I'm from Los Angeles originally, so LA comes out of my mouth. I've lived in Chicago and Memphis and Atlanta in Portland, Oregon. So I've also lived in rural areas like Cornell, New York, and Alfred, New York. So there are places where Black folks, you wouldn't know there's a community of Black folks in Cornell, New York, that are descendant also. They migrated up from slavery, and some escaped. My ex girlfriends from college, her father told the story of walking from Florida to Rochester, New York, and determined to get out of the situation he was in, and he walked. And I heard him tell me the story. So I know that he, how people can maybe exaggerate. This man was a laborer with his hands. You saw the labor in his hands. You could see how his hands had worked the ground and worked things and machinery. You don't have to know what his story was. You could see it in his entire body, the way his body moved, the way he walked. And he talked about walking from Florida, leaving his family behind in Florida to get away from what was there to something that he was told was better in the North. So we have these stories, and we know that people exist. So what needs to happen in a rural community? We can't forget that there are rural areas that don't have the same kind of industry. So giving people a bunch of small business loans to start a business where there's 1,200 people, how many businesses can you have that are going to continue to thrive? So we have to be really, really careful about the government saying, well, we'll throw some money at them, and they're going to go out and buy Nikes and Adidas and some new cars and buy a whole bunch of food that they may or may not all be able to eat before it spoils. And we're just going to get it right back to these same companies that have benefited from this labor. So we have to be really mindful of deciding for communities what's the best way for them to utilize the reparations in that community and what those people need. If someone says, I just want, give me my money so I can leave. I'm moving somewhere. I want to go somewhere else. I want to pick my family up out of this area that we've never been able to get out of for 16 generations. We're leaving this part of, Arkansas. We're leaving this part of Georgia or somewhere. We want to be out of here. And then we want to go somewhere, but we can't live anywhere else because we don't have enough money to live at the cost of living there. We need a new start. So families can get the new start that they want. Some people may want to take their money and go back to, as we're doing DNA tests and Henry Louis Gates and others are finding out where they're from, people might want to go back to somewhere where they're from, where their ancestry was from. That's fine. They can take their money and do with it what they want to do with it. But they can also send their kids to school. They can also make sure they have good health care. They can also make sure they have good opportunity. If we make this American dream a real dream and not a nightmare that it has been for so many of us, then we've got to let people say what their dreams are. There isn't a single American dream. There are as many Americans as there are dreams. And so we've got to be able to find ways to make those dreams come true for people. And I think you asked about the other actions. So I'm excited about Illinois. I also read that Rochester is looking at a similar passage of legislation, similar to Rochester, New York, similar to Evanston, Illinois. And the first thought that came to my mind about that was it's interesting that Black people who participate in the usage of marijuana have been demonized and jailed for having marijuana. Smoking it, using it, selling it, whatever. And now that it's legal, the government is finding a way to make money off of it and then saying, well, let's take that money and give it back to the people who we originally stole it from and treated them badly, but using the same substance that now we're going to tell them they can use a substance. So in other words, I can buy my own reparations. Every time I buy some marijuana, I'm paying myself back. Reparations. It doesn't make sense to me, but I haven't dug deep into it. That's just my initial thought was like, how does that work? How did you decide that was the way to deal with it? And you haven't reckoned with letting the people out of jail who were in jail for things like marijuana usage or selling, even though now it's become legal. So it's interesting to me that But I know that St. Paul in Minnesota, Traherne Cruz, one of my co-chairs for the National Black Caucus and one of the co-chairs of the chair of the Minnesota State Party, Green Party, he along with other folks, Monica James in Indiana, helped with some of the research, and there were other folks there, Toya, and I would say her last name, but now Toya, forget me if you see this, I am blanking on being able to say your whole name. I'm thinking Minister Toya because that's what she goes by. Woodland, and others in that area. I don't know, Darnella and Reginald and other people in that area. I know Dee also on our board was from Minnesota and from St. Paul or St. Cloud in the area, and she had done some things years ago along these efforts. But all these people have contributed in some way or another to the brain power that it takes. But Trey Hearn took the lead on that, from my understanding, and really worked with the city council there to get them to pass legislation. Trey Hearn got that package and the process and the idea from a mentor of his who said, these are the things that need to be done, and we need to roll this out across the country. And so that's one of the things that the National Black Caucus is looking at, is how do we take the model that Trey and others built in St. Paul, look at what's being done in Evanston and in Rochester, in North Carolina, wherever else it may be, and begin to see how do we replicate, how do we get cities and states and municipalities to replicate these efforts across the nation. I think those are beginning dialogues, and that states and cities, they may owe their own set of reparations as a result of what they did and participated in, but I think that does not absolve the federal government from its responsibility and liability to Black people, so and to African descendants particularly, and others. So I think that all of those things have to work together, and it's a matter of pulling all those pieces together. So we're looking at how do we continue to push these efforts. If we do our lobby day in June, part of it will be talking about a national Black agenda that we are developing in relationship to other Black organizations. And that Black agenda includes reparations. It's a part of the larger Black agenda. And so when we go to talk to our representatives and senators, we'll be talking about the Black agenda as a whole, but we'll also specifically be talking about the reparations pieces. All of us have different pieces of our lives that matter. I am an artist, a performing artist, a mental health person, and a minister. And so those areas are very, very important to me. So mental health and addressing mental health issues are going to be things that I would definitely talk with representatives and senators about, as well as access to the arts. I think any culture that does not lift up and support its arts is a culture that's bound to die, because the arts are the things that help to create culture, but also perpetuate and hold on to the legacy of our communities. And so we have to fund and support arts activities and energies all around as well. So there's a lot of things that we should be doing and can be doing. And so we'll be bringing those things to our Capitol, but we're also asking, if folks aren't able to come, that they replicate what we're thinking about at the national level happening at their state levels at the same time. So if you can't come from Portland, from Oregon, you can go to the state capitol and you can speak to your reps and your senators and those folks when they're in session. So it may be different times because different states are in session at different times, but you could replicate the same actions at some point in your state legislation or in your city government or your county government or municipalities or your parish or wherever you are, as in Louisiana.
Good, Aaliyah?
I think one of the major things that we have difficulty in overcoming in all of this is the money aspect and how reparations should be granted. And that is exactly some of the issues that you've touched on already. I believe that different people have their different ideas, whether it's grants, whether it's money, whether it's land, whether it's education packages and so forth. And I do see reparations evolving as being from town to town, city to city. It may move larger on a larger scale to state, to state level and then federal. How do you see all of this evolving, and what do you feel would be the best way to address some of these issues?
I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I think we cannot say, well, let's just focus on our city. There are people who do that, who are really interested in city government, people that are really excited and work around state issues, and people that work on federal issues. It takes all of us to hit at all of these different points. because I think at every point, no one can be absolved of the responsibility. So because the federal government does something, doesn't mean that certain areas, certain cities, what's owed to the folks in Oklahoma where Black Wall Street was destroyed, and those families and those people that built those businesses and that work, what's owed to them is very, very different from that place than what the federal government might still owe to those same people, if that makes sense. So I think all of those are points that have to be taken, and we can't do it in, we cannot get into a fight between my version is more important than your version, right? All of the versions work together, and that's the key, is that Black and brown people, African descendant folks particularly, and everyone else. And I want to make a distinction that I say that on purpose, that I've come to understand that there are specific things that are owed to people that are descendants of slavery, that were African descendants of slavery. That's a very clear subset of a population that this is where it starts. There are all the other Black folks that have come over, who have come here thinking this is a better way of life for them, and have had to suffer the same atrocities, the same Jim Crow laws, the same police brutality laws, the same racist systems that are there, that have then affected their families for several generations as well. And so there is something that's owed to the Black communities as a whole, and there's something that's owed to a particular subset of that community, of those communities, because of the servitude that their ancestors have been placed in. So I think we need to be really clear that when we're talking about reparations, we're talking about a wider basket of things that includes this huge chunk for those that are descended from slavery. And we cannot allow those that are descended from slavery to be erased out of the equation and then just talk about these reparations in general for Black community, because that doesn't repair the pain or the hurt or the wealth, the stealing of wealth from those folks. So part of it is that the answer to that is that we can't separate these parts out. We have to recognize them as a part of the whole and make sure that that's what's being brought forward. But I do think that we can't get in ourselves as Black people into fights between which one of us has the right to have the mic right now, right? We all need to find a way to share the mic and push the agenda. While we are beginning to get the attention, now is the time to go for all of it. Now is the time to say everything that needs to be said from those mics all across the nation. And one of the keys that I was talking with someone about recently, and I'm hoping that we'll get her on a session with the National Black Caucus soon. But she was talking about the work she'd done for Nigerian women, and after she left Nigeria and came to the U.S. and she works in D.C., but talking about how they were able to fight and put pressure on the government globally. So we've got to reach out to our global allies to say, this is a stain, a big, huge stain that you cannot just wash away or bleach away, no pun intended, from the US. It's a stain that has to be paid for and worked out. And so globally, we have to depend on our global partners around the world to shame the US for its shameful treatment of Black people across the board, and particularly its legacy of slavery. And that means that while the US has a right also to shame some of those European countries and say, well, you need to do something too. But we need to have that kind of argument. Let those governments that are largely white and white run argue with each other and make each other feel bad about something. Fine, if that's what it takes, y'all work that out. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that real change happens for people, that's just changing the systemic nature of what's been going on, but legitimate financial change happens for people who have been stolen from for a long time. So I think those are the ways that we deal with it. It's not a this or that. It's a this and that. It's an all of it. It's a this and kind of situation, and we need to not allow ourselves to get into fights about it. If I'm concerned about Black folks that have been here since the 60s and coming for a better life and leaving from other places, and they're my friends or my family or whatever, it's all right for me to fight for that. But if I'm also fighting for my ancestry and my folks that are descended from African slaves, it's all right for me to fight for that too. We don't need to be at odds with each other. We're the same cousins. We're the same brothers and sisters. We are the same people at the end of the day. And so we can't fight each other on which one is worse. It's all horrible, right? We can talk about the priority. And the priority for me is making sure that African descendants of slavery, of chattel slavery particularly, are able to have those issues addressed, and everyone else gets addressed at the same time. We just start here and then say, oh, and by the way, while you're doing A, B, and C, don't forget you got to do D, E, F, and G as well, right? It's not that only do this and don't worry about that. It's not fix this problem and this problem will take care of the rest of it. That's not how it's going to work. It's an all, we are all in this together thing, and we have to fight all together.
Wow. I just really love your energy, Daryl. I have to say, we've had many guests, but no one as pumped as you. No one as well versed in every aspect as you. And that's just, I have to give it to the Green Party. I just have to say the level of passion and dedication that we have. It's not shown at the forefront, but you can see it in all of our workers. And I'm just going to take this opportunity to give a shout out to the Green Party for that. Having said that, we did bring Justice Jahan, who is a UN Hague UNESCO representative. He was on record in one of our reparation sessions, and he did say that there needs to be reparations granted. And that was one of the decisions that, has been made at the UN level. And then further from that, he did acknowledge and state that, we don't have a Human Rights Commission in the US. And that is very shameful. So he was also saying that needs to be established. That is something that as Green Party reps, we need to be on board for and push for, because human rights is important. And
the hard part with that, Aaliyah, I agree with you. The challenge we have is that so many people have just sort of not dealt with the UN. As a legitimate place for us to go to and get the right kind of support and the right kind of pressure. It's a great place for us to be engaging in, and it physically is in our country. We can physically go there, as opposed to it's not in The Hague, in other words, right? And so I think that the Green Party would do well to figure out how we can be more engaged with actions at the UN level and access. We talk about right now the HR1 and the bill that's going on that will basically decimate in many ways, or make it extremely hard, much harder for third-party candidates to get on ballots or to be able to get elected, and particularly at the presidential level. And but we should be going to the UN saying, shame on you. If we can go to other countries that have 50 different candidates from 50 different parties running, and we can go in and say, we're coming in to monitor to make sure your elections are fair. How dare you? How dare you say that you want to make sure elections are fair somewhere else when you don't let the voices of third parties and minority voices heard? How dare you? And we need to be pushing that issue from our allies and get them to push back on the US government as well, because that is another way that they pay attention. They pay attention to what their peers are going to be thinking about them and saying about them. And we had 4 years of a administration that virtually tried to destroy every possible relationship we'd have internationally, except for the ones that we don't necessarily, we are told we don't necessarily want to have. That's debatable. But we really, really have to figure out how do we get out of this America only kind of consciousness, that although even in the Green Party, we don't naturally think we're thinking that way. We grew up in this culture. We grew up here. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, classism, and all the rest, othering, is a part of the fabric of this country. It's woven into the unspoken lines of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. It's woven in there. You may not see it, but it's the unwritten, invisible ink that ties those documents and what this country stands for together. And we have to be the ones to light the fire to show the invisible ink and then rewrite what needs to be rewritten.
So in Chicago, they're trying to pass something called the Civilian Police Accountability Councils. That's the CPAC. And what that does is it breaks it down by wards. And so one of the Illinois Green Party goals is we have organizing tools. So each group can have their own website. They can do petitions, letters, campaigns, fundraisers, all on day one. And so would something like a council, a review council, for a community council that could receive the money and or at least decide what they want and how much their budget would be, that's something that I would believe that that would be green friendly, where we have a council, we set up councils where the legislator says you have to, in the communities, you have to have at least a reparations council to decide where that is at. Would that be something fair to say or do, or what do you think about that?
This is the first I'm hearing that level of breakdown, so it sounds interesting. I'd have to sort of figure out how it works. Here's when I start hearing about these things and how are we going to populate these committees and these commissions, my biggest fear is that the people that have the most power right now, the Dems and Republicans particularly, are going to pick the people that they want to do it, and those people are going to say what they want to be said, as opposed to going back. So we've got to figure out, how do you get the real community gatekeepers and community folks that are in the trenches that know their community to be a part of these kinds of things? And some of that has to be paid. They have to be paid positions. Some of the people that are the most outspoken activists are working another job somewhere, and they come at home and do their activist work. Well, this has to be something that they can say, I don't want to work at the local whatever anymore. I want to do my passion and do that work because they've been doing that work. And we've got to have a way for community to support and lift up those names and those people and get them on there. So I think that's one key to that. But as it relates to the police thing, I think that there's going to be many ways that we have to look at how we change community policing and change the police force. I think that the defund and revitalize and restore is something that is interesting, that we are going to have to look at dismantling the way in which power has been distributed to the police forces in the US. Many of that is to take out the paramilitary Israeli training and that they're getting. People are not your enemies. Our citizens are not our enemies. So we don't need to train as if we are going to take out a hostile government or hostile military force in our neighborhood, right? So what is the use of that? So we've got to find a way to retrain, to make sure that we're hiring people from within communities that are going to become service officers in that area and peace officers. I remember the day when they were, in some places they were called peace officers, right? And not just police officers, right? So how do we do that? Someone said to me the other day that one way to do some of this is to redistribute the responsibility to the firefighters. I'm not sure that I 100% agree with this, but the logic is that firefighters are trained to save lives. And so their first instinct going into a situation is, how do I save the people in this space? So maybe it's whether you change that or create a different force or get police officers and firefighters to have some similar training. Because I think there's psychological training that takes place for firefighters to prepare them to be able to face those kind of dangers. I've always admired firefighters. I wanted to marry a firefighter if ever I could, right? Just because I just thought they're just going to be caring, loving kinds of folks, right? But maybe there's a way to cross train so that those people that are going to be peace officers protecting the peace will be trained to think human first, as opposed to thinking someone's committed a crime, shoot to immobilize, not shoot to kill. Someone's got a gun, shoot the leg. shoot the arm, whatever, disable their ability to discharge the weapon, not kill them. Because we don't know what's going on. If the person's having, now, there are those that will say, if a person's having a mental health issue and the mental health issue they have causes them to become violent, and then there's a misery that person has because they can't control that. So them being taken out of their misery is in a way both saving the community and making them less. I'm not going to go down that. The logic of that is crazy, right? So we need to be able to disarm people and help people. Police officers saying, I was afraid for my life because, well, listen, if you're afraid for your life, don't walk up to the car. Call some other folks out. The car is stopped and pulled over. If the car is surrounded, help me understand the logic of thinking. I fear for I'm one of 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 officers. I start shooting because I feared for my life. Where were the rest of my backup? Where did I not believe they had me? Did I not believe that I was a part of a force that was going to take care of the situation? So this whole idea that I feared for my life, because listen, we fear for our lives in certain neighborhoods because we have disenfranchised people so long, and we have kept opportunity from those communities for so long that we have let crime run rampant in those communities for so long that people are afraid to go to those neighborhoods, in those communities, in those housing complexes. So let's fix the problem. The problem is, why are you afraid to go there? Because we've created a situation that makes it dangerous for people who even live there to be there. So let's fix that problem. And then you don't have to be afraid to go anywhere. You're not afraid to go into a house. You're not afraid to go into a place. De-escalation techniques. I've watched videos where police officers argue, listen, somebody gets angry and is mad that something has happened. And they start talking about, not again, not in my neighborhood, that means that person has some trauma. That police officer should automatically begin to think, this person is not approaching this from a purely logical standpoint. They're traumatized and they're reacting from a trauma base. If I understand trauma and understand how trauma impacts people, their emotions, and how they react to things, then I would have techniques to say, how do I diffuse the situation versus arguing back with somebody? Listen, if I have the power and the authority to shoot you, kill you, to arrest you and lock you up, what do I need to argue with you for? Say whatever you want to say. Your words are not going to hurt me. You can yell, rant, and scream all you want to. Get it out. Because the reality is, the longer someone does that, eventually they're going to be exhausted, both physically and emotionally and mentally, and they will stop at some point. But you argue back and you fuel it so you can then draw your weapon, because now you're afraid because somebody ran in the house. They ran to get away from you. So, if you approach the situation from a different perspective, then you don't need to be afraid. We're afraid of you. People are afraid when you are driving in your car down the street and a police officer is driving behind you just because they happen to be going the same direction. People get nervous and scared. They don't want to be followed by you. So there should be some rules. I said a long time ago when Black Lives Matter, before Black Lives Matter started, stuff's been going on, right? But before BLM became a thing, right? I was like, you know what we should have is a moratorium on certain things in the police. Police, so the city, the state, whatever, can just simply say, there are some things we're not going to do for the next 90 days. And we want to see what happens. We're not following you. We're not pulling anybody over because you got a headlight missing. We will take your license plate down and you'll get a letter in the mail that tells you, hey, you have a rear light out. You need to get that fixed, right? We're keeping a record of it. We're going to send you a letter. You get 3 letters, it's not fixed. Then you're going to get a citation. It all comes in the mail. Then you got to come down to court and see somebody about it. Then we'll deal with you in the court, right? So we're not doing that. If you're walking down the street, we're not stopping you. We're not stopping people for walking down the street. We're just not going to do it, period. Even if you look suspicious, we're just not going to do it because we don't have a right to. So we're going to not do certain things. And have the communities identify what are those things that police are doing that are creating more problems. And then just simply say, we're not doing them anymore. If you're speeding and you're going 5 miles over the zone, if you're not dangerous, we're not stopping you. Now, we get it. We're not saying go off and commit crime, right? But we're just saying these low-level offenses that turn into something else, we're not doing that. We're not stopping it. You know, so that way we can get we got to get a baseline in this country, all across the country, somewhere where people get the level of toxicity between the community and police comes down. And the only way to do that is for the police to stand down, to stand back, and to legitimately go out on calls when there's a legitimate call. I don't know how many times I've been sitting somewhere and I see somebody fly through a red light. Police or somebody somewhere nearby watching somebody else. They don't go after that person flying through the red light, but they'll go down the person driving too slow, pulling over, doing something else. Like, I don't understand. So we need the police to stand down, and we need government to enforce that and create a mechanism so that we can reset the bar on the relationships between police and community. I'm sorry, I'm just going on and on, but listen, I don't know how much time we have for tonight, but I don't want to, but I'm sorry.
I just got a question. Senator Roland Barrett, former senator, I should say, had a proposal where he wants to start a corporation and get grants from certain foundations. And I think it's overcoming a difficulty in terms of fundraising and so forth. Do you think that that kind of version is something that the Green Party would support and go along with?
I need to see a little bit more about what the senator was proposing as it relates to foundations. But I think in the case that there are foundations who are associated with families who had wealth that was, again, stolen from labor that was unpaid for, then those foundations setting aside a particular portion of their endowment to help support and fund these efforts would probably make sense. However, I would say if the government needs a place to put its money that's going to be used for this, that then they fund new Black-owned and Black-developed, they find folks that are interested in running or can run a philanthropic organization, because there are many of us out here. We work for other people's organizations. So give us the opportunity to run our own, and you put that money in and let us then distribute that money out. So I think that there are ways to do that. We may need to set up new corporations, new foundations that do that work, and new nonprofits that will build this work in community. Or maybe not new ones, but fund the ones that exist. There are thousands and thousands of nonprofits that are out there trying to do good work, many of which don't have enough funding to do the basic work they're trying to do, but they're doing so much with so little. So we give them more and encourage them and give them the guidelines that what this money is for. The RFPs will dictate what the money is for, but you let some of those smaller nonprofits that can touch the people immediately with those resources. So those are ways to do that. So the foundation idea could work. But I would think that you have to look at it from a couple of different perspectives, some from those that may have benefited or their legacy, their wealth that the foundations has comes from the legacy of the business that those families had when they created then those family funds that turned into, when they died, it turned into a foundation. So there may be some things owed from that perspective, but also then setting up something that will be run by and for these efforts is important to do.
Thank you. That's my last question for tonight. I'm going to leave it to Anna and Candace.
We're closing. We have 15 minutes left. So Anna, are there anything else that you would like to say to Daryl? She's on mute.
Yeah, sorry. No, I mean, you talked a lot, but it was great. It was great to hear things. I know we've been looking to connect nationally as well. We talked with a couple other state organizations, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Kansas, Missouri. So it's nice to, talk with more people, especially on the national level. yeah, I'm looking forward to what the Illinois Reparations Committee decides on for a call of action. We were looking forward to working with the national group on their campaign. And we have some organizing tools that are brand new to us. So we're looking forward to using those.
And we would love to hear and get some of those things from you, and we can share those with our reparations working group through the National Black Caucus. And then ultimately, we may, with our efforts, the intention is to make some modifications to the current platform. And in doing so, we hope to have the National Party maybe create a plan of action. I'm a strong believer that we can have a platform. Platforms are great. The words on a paper or words on a website, they mean nothing if there's no action attached to the platform. And so I think every piece of our platform needs to have an action item associated with it that we are actively working on at the national, state, and local levels. And so I would love to hear, Anna, more of what, I think you have my email, so I'd love to get more of some of the things you guys are looking at, the resources you have, share them with Traherne in our National Black Caucus Reparations Working Group, and then see what comes out of that we can then also turn around and propose from our national caucus to the National Green Party as a whole for action items. And I'd love to continue, and I know they would, I know I can speak for him in saying that he would love to get more insight and more people engaged in this process. Aaliyah, others, if you're not a part of that, we'd love to have you at least offering your insight into Candace, of course, what you're doing. And I'm looking forward actually to talking with some of your international folks that you've been talking to and figuring out. I'm reading about the summit that folks are having, and I'm thinking I want to try to see if I can get somehow invited to be a part of that summit. And
I think they'd love to be part of it. We had the Honorable Philip Braddock from Australia as well, who brought in the reparations there for the Indigenous folks of Australia.
yeah.
His main concern was the funding in the US. He was sort of curious to know how we would fund so many people in terms of population. Because if you take the population of Australia and America, obviously there's a huge discrepancy. And then having said that, the Indigenous folk there and versus the African descendants of slaves here, you know, it's much larger and scaled issue here. So that was his number one concern. And
Yeah.
I think that is what we are looking at in terms of overcoming. I don't think anybody would be against reparations had it not been for the difficulty in the who's and the hows of how to go about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think that this country, you know, I would say that it is not those who have been harmed. It is not their responsibility to figure out how you unharm me. It's the people who did the harm have to figure out, how do we pay for this? You know, how do we?
Unfortunately, the burden's the other way around right now. Maybe the conversation
Absolutely.
will shift, but that's what I see.
Absolutely, it is the other way around. But I think that we have to give some of this back to the folks that have to be the decision makers to say, you know, you created this problem. Your ancestors, you are descended from slaves. And so you, as much as we are descended from slaves, you're descended from slave owners. And so you need to figure out how you make it right.
Yeah, that's interesting that you brought that up, Aaliyah, that we are, as Black people, we're presenting our case and trying to argue with the powers that be about, you know, why they should pay us for reparations. And I think that is backwards. I think we need to re-strategize on how, you know, we are coming about this and presenting our case. And there has to be a shift. It has to be maybe prayer or something, but I think we've already talked enough. It's about action. Now it says no more talking needs to be done. Less talk and more action. That's where I'm at.
Here are the demands that we have. These are our demands.
So we're blue in the face. I think we've done that enough. You know, and at the end of the day, what do we get? What do we get? You know, still we're talking, we're pouring our hearts out, and then they turn around and, you know, and show us, like, you know, their backsides. So nothing has changed. I think it's about action, and I think we've gotten a lot of people on board. with Congress and the House. And I don't think we need to do any more talking, honestly. I think we have enough information. We presented enough information, and now it's time for the powers that be to run with it. We don't want to talk ourselves out of a blessing. You know what I mean? So just
Well, and here's the thing.
Let them do
And
their
the other,
thing and just chill out and enjoy life. And our blessings are here. You know, they're coming. I don't want to, you know.
and here's the other question that, here's the other question that goes with that. The other question that goes with that is, what are we prepared to do if they say no? Or if what they propose is insufficient? I think we have to think that way. We cannot just think, do it. We've got to think, what happens if they don't give us, or what they want to propose is woefully inadequate? What are we as a people prepared to do? And I think that, and what I think pushes the envelope is they need to be afraid of what we're prepared to do. Because if they're not afraid, they just think they can do whatever they want to do.
They do what they want. Yeah, that's the thing.
They need to be afraid of, if we don't do this, what is going to happen to our country? Are they worried about people? Unlike they might now be more worried nowadays about those folks that did some insurrection on January 6th. They need to be afraid of us doing that all across the country, of us taking back our country. This is our country. I'm not going back to Africa because my ancestors from Africa, and I want to go visit, meet my kin folks, family, culture, and go to parts that are no longer, and go to see parts that are not even related to me. I want to go see all of that, right? This is home. This is my place. And we got to take it back. We were brought here, and we were brought here and sold a bill of goods, and was a load of lies.
You took we shouldn't have taken any wooden nickels. You don't take any wooden nickels. We got to stop
right,
taking.
But if you don't know that the nickel, if you don't know wood has no value,
right?
Then you took what they told you. This is valuable. Here, take these nickels.
Take these wooden nickels, right? I think the way we go about it has to be peaceful. You know, definitely peaceful, and maybe boycotting, but it shouldn't be televised. I think that's one mistake of always talking. You know, as Black community, we always want to get out and talk, you know, and tell our business and tell the world what we're going to do instead of just keeping it quiet and then discussing, you know, what we're going to do, what we plan on doing, like the Indians did with the farmers, you know, recently. You didn't know. We had no idea that was happening until, you know, we read it in the paper, and there were million Indian farmers boycotting. They didn't televise it. But it definitely should be peaceful. And, you know,
I'll agree with you.
But I really don't, I have full faith that we will be funded. Reparations is here. I don't want to talk myself and put that stuff out there because it's going to manifest depending on how much you believe what you say, you know?
Absolutely.
I think we have to begin speaking like kings and queens. You got to speak that way and speak like you don't need anything, and therefore it will manifest.
I agree with you 100% from my spiritual background. I completely agree with you 100% that is the law of attraction. That is the universal law. I think as a political people, besides the spiritual side, it's being aware that if there is no pressure, then the movement, we've seen how slow the movement has been, right? Over decades, it's been slow to even have this conversation at the level that it's happening now. So that's because new pressure is being added. And I think we have to add the pressure and the fear of what will people do if we don't do something that's been doing right by them at this point. It's too far in our history to go any further without doing it. So I think they do need to be concerned about what that will be. I agree with you. We don't need to get out there telling everything we're thinking all the time. You know, right. I think we need to hold some stuff to ourselves and have some private community conversation, get some plan of action, you know, and then act on it. go back to some of the old organizing days. But I
Right.
do think that while we want to go from a Gandhian and a King kind of perspective of peaceful nonviolence, but I do think we have to have an element of Malcolm X in there that says, you know what, we're peaceful people and we're willing to be peaceful. But if you want to act and show us your backside, then we are worrying people as well. And so if you want the warrior to stay silent in the background, I suggest you act according to the peacekeepers that are in the front. But if the peacekeepers fail, yeah, I don't want to be you if the peacekeepers fail. That's what they need to be thinking, that we cannot fail, because if we fail, there'll be a larger price that will tear the country apart in a whole different way. I think without that thought, it's sort of, well, we'll do a little something, and that'll make them happy for now, and their great grandchildren will come back saying it wasn't enough. But we can say, well, we did something. We can't allow us to get to that point where they feel like they can throw anything at us and it'll just be acceptable.
Well, we got the peace troops out there in the front. And we're going to keep it that way. I think peace and love is the way to go. That's a strength.
And I'm not a violent person. I don't even like violence.
I mean, hey, sometimes war has to come through peace, You got to have war to have peace. I get that. But
And I hope we can take that at the voting booth, and if we need to do a sit-in or sit outside, 6 feet away, socially distanced,
Yeah.
out the podium, and sign up for community help resources right there on the spot, and have a community, but maybe regular. If we force the vote, and then we'll know who is opposed to it, and then we can, that would be something that we
Absolutely
would look at.
It's one last thing I'll say, Anna. When you said that about voting, I think this is an interesting idea, and I know a lot of Green people will not want to do it. But as many Greens have felt like some Democrats and others have infiltrated the Green Party in different places and have come in to try to destroy the work of the party and to minimize it, there is the other Trojan horse possibility of having Greens who are aligned enough that they can walk in and be in that. And imagine, if you will, electing 1,000 new state and local legislators who went in under one banner and all on the same day, all across the country said, I am now switching my leadership, my party, and I'm now Green, right? And so flipping entire states or city governments by who we got in, and letting people, this would take several years to build up, of course, and several rounds of getting people in, but you can get people in because the reality is so many of those folks want to be us anyway. If they could, the only reason why they're not being Green is because they don't think they can get elected. But if they thought they could get elected, they'd be us all day, every day. Our values are clear. Our platform is superior. What we stand for, our pillars are obvious. And most people, at least most working class, poor, middle class, and folks, even some of our wealthier folks agree. So it would take a serious amount of organizing to organize campaigns that mirror the opposition, if you will. And then at a designated time, call it the Green Day of Reckoning, where Congress people, senators, state legislators, governors, state senators, reps, city council people, mayors, police chiefs, sheriffs, attorneys generals that are all elected, judges that are elected if they're in partisan elections, all on this Green Day of Reckoning, change their allegiance to the Green Party and completely shift the power dynamic in the country from within.
I like that idea.
Dang, Daryl, you're onto something.
I love that. I love it.
You've been talking some big things tonight. Especially the UN and the third party vote. I really, you blew my mind with that one. I'm starting to think that maybe that's where we need to go instead of taking it to the courts and so forth and finding the ballot access. Maybe that's an alternative option, and we should start looking into that. I agree.
Yeah, you just have to have people willing to keep their mouth shut and not run, not say it, not jump the gun. They've got to act like they've got to wear the sheep's clothing or the wolf's clothing. They got to wear it and they got to sing like they are wolves in that, and then they can take it off. But they got to be in there, but they still have their meetings with other people, with green folks, and are very, very clear of what they're doing. But we have to be able to keep it quiet. We got to be able to keep it under wraps, and that's a bigger sell. But I don't know. Either there.
We'll talk because this is actually live.
This is live on YouTube.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing.
Right, it's live. It's just an idea. We haven't got anyone to agree to do the idea. So even though it's live, they won't know who. Listen, if we do it, they won't know we're doing it, and they won't know who, because we didn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have some Green Party International folks that you could connect with as well. Lee Rhiannon in particular, and Mehreen Faruqi. Lee was a former senator in Australia, and Mehreen is currently elected as well. But those are two international, as well as, I have from Australia or even Pakistan. I could recommend folks to liaise with on an international level, be it with any issue. I think that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, let's talk about a conversation, and I'll get Dr. Christy, can't say her last name. We're talking about her coming to the National Black Caucus meeting next month and sharing her story of the work she did both in the US and in Nigeria for women. And so that she may be able to shed some light, and we can have a larger conversation with these other international colleagues that we might be able to shift some things in a way that makes people take notice. What's been fun for you guys today? I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't expect it to be this much fun, but it's great being here and being a part of collective sessions. And I'm looking forward to any other time that we can come together and or refer. I've got some great people in the caucus and in my state and in other places that you need to know and hear from and talk to on a variety of issues as well. So love to refer some other people to you and get their voices heard and out there as well. This is far from being about me, but about what we're doing as a collective body, and lifting up all those voices around, because we cannot do it alone.
Yeah, we're stronger together.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, you heard it, everyone watching. This has been another collective sessions. Tonight's special guest is the one and only Daryl Molch from the National Black Caucus and the Green Party United States. Tune in next Sunday, same time, same place. Peace, stay well.